Um, we don't know too much about what he did. There's some people think he was a carpenter, but we do know that he created things with his hands. And we know enough about Jesus to know that his deal was caring and loving. And so we know, we can assume and conclude from this that Jesus loved what he did with his hands. That he cared about what he did with his hands. And that he loved and he cared about the people that he did it with. And he loved and he cared about the people he did it for. And Jesus' friends knew what Jesus did. They knew what Jesus was. They knew that Jesus cared and that he loved. And Jesus, as he was getting ready to leave, sat down with his friends and he said to them, you know what? When he could have given them a whole list of things he wanted them to do, and he would have been right. But what he did was he sat down with them at a meal and he said, I want you, when you do this, I want you to remember me. Because he knew that memories were important. Jesus could have lived his life, and if it wasn't for the memories and his friends sharing those memories, it would have come to nothing. But his friends had the memories, and they shared the memories, and it changed the course of history. And it changed the course of mankind forever. And so it's appropriate that today we celebrate Scott. That we celebrate Scott's life. Scott was a craftsman. He created things with his hands. And there's a bond that exists between craftsmen. We don't know each other well a lot of times, but we just know that a lot of times we do crazy things that other people wouldn't even understand. But we do it because we know we have the outcome in mind. We know what the results of our actions are. And that was Scott. He created things. He did stuff with his hands. And a lot of times, if you were looking from the outside in, you had no clue what the finished product was. But if you've ever seen any of his finished product, you know it was a masterpiece. Scott cared about people, and he loved people. His deal was caring and loving. And so you know that he cared about, he loved what he did. And you know that he cared about, and he loved the people that he did it with. And he cared about, and he loved the people that he did it for. Excuse me for just a second. Maybe I should look at my notes. Scott never worked. Scott loved and he cared. You know, they say, if you do what you love and you do it with people you love and you do it for people you love, you'll never work a day in your life. I think that was Scott. He created great things and he loved what he did, but he didn't work. He loved and he cared. Jesus asked his friends to remember him. Because, well, first of all, Jesus was the Son of God, so he knows stuff. But he knew just how important the memories were. I mean, memories bring joy where there's pain. Memories bring excuse me. Memories make sense out of silliness. Memories bring understanding. So today we're here to ease the pain by remembering the joy. We're here to make sense of all this. So Scott would want you to know that he loved you and that he cares about you. And these memories could just change the course of your little part of the world. So remember Scott. Remember that guy. Remember his spirit. Remember his attitude. And let's change the world.
Robert Scott Bomengen, Scotty, was born on October 22nd, 1965 in Colorado Springs, Colorado. He returned home on February 29, 2024 at the age of 57 in Bountiful, Utah. Scotty is survived by his loving daughter, Frasia Bomengen, Brian, two beautiful granddaughters, Navia and Echo, his parents, Lee and Brenda Heinrich, brother Brad Neroth, Patty, Lindsay Brooke, Bo Callie, brother Drew Heinrich and family, Victoria Blakely and family, Jeff Heinrich and family, and Uncle Bob Bomengen and family. Scotty grew up in Cascade, Idaho, where he enjoyed time with family and friends. He appreciated the small town and often shared stories about school and his love for basketball. He truly loved his home in Meridian and was a tremendous presence in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. His recovery and service work were always a priority. He touched many lives in the AA community. He enjoyed spending time in his shop, working on cars, or just chilling at home with his beloved dogs. He was well known for his biscuits and gravy. Friends and family would flock to his house or camping spot just to make sure they didn't miss out on his biscuits and gravy. He spent lots of time at Meridian Speedway and traveling with his true racing family. He enjoyed golfing, camping, poker, fast cards, loud music, basketball, football, and was truly the goofball of the party. Time spent with his mother and father was precious to him, and he cherished every moment with them. He looked forward to spending Sundays with his granddaughter, Navia. He sincerely appreciated every moment he had with his daughter, son-in-law, and granddaughters. Scotty was known by all who met him as a kind and genuine man. He looked for the good in people and strived to honor their humanity. Scotty's brilliant blue eyes sparkled with humor as he engaged with those around him. He will be remembered for his compassionate spirit, his sense of humor, and his deep commitment to his loving family. His stories, his laughter, and the lessons he passed along remain with us. He guides us to take care of each other, to be fair, and to keep our sense of humor through life's challenges. His real gift was not in what he did, but in who he was. He was a champion for others and was happiest when he was serving others. He will be forever missed, but his memory will live on through the hearts he touched.
I'm going to get through this the best I can. For those of you who don't know, I am Scott Bomengen's daughter, Frasia Bomengen, and this is his granddaughter, Navia. We're here to talk about some of the best memories we have with my dad. I am the luckiest person in this room, I'm sorry to say, because many of you might have known him as a friend. Many of you might have known him as a coworker in Alcoholics Anonymous, but I was lucky enough to know him as my dad. And he was the best dad anybody could have ever asked for. He wasn't perfect, but he was mine. And nobody is going to be able to replace what we've lost. But all we can do is hold on to every moment that we had with my dad. He was a fun-loving guy. He would give you the shirt off of his back. And his legacy will live on through me, and through his granddaughters, who he loved more than anything in this world. And he was the best grandfather. Sorry. I just want everybody to remember my dad and for his services that he did, whether it be through Alcoholics Anonymous. And I want everybody here to carry on that legacy through service, through charity work, through whatever you can do, because that would have made my dad very happy. Sorry. Just please keep my dad in your thoughts and prayers every night, because he will be with us. Thank you.
Breathe deep, Heinrich. God almighty. Well, I'm an old guy, and my technology is a number 2 lead pencil and paper. Welcome, folks. My, that kid of mine touched a lot of people, didn't he? You know, it was to know where Scott was at and how you met him, I thought maybe you'd like to know how he got there. So in 1977, I met this little scrawny kid, tow-headed, a little arrogant, a little belligerent. He wanted to know what that guy with that baseball cap and the dark rimmed glasses, and at that time a black mustache, was doing in his house with his mother. Well, he says, if you make my mother cry, I will hurt you. Very protective. Was very protective all of his life of his mother and his grandmother and of his daughter. But there was two conditions that his mother and I agreed upon before we took a next step. And that was one, her two boys had to like me. You know, I held $20 bills, didn't even work. But we finally got past that stage, and then the next condition was my three kids had to get along with her two kids. Oh, wow. I had two boys and a daughter. So the first time I brought them up, Scott and Brad were a little leery, but they took them over to the rec hall, disappeared, and we didn't see them until night. She trapped me. Met the two conditions, so I couldn't back out. So when she asked me to marry her, I said yes. You see, I can tell these stories because she's not here to say otherwise. Life growing up at West Mountain Lodge. Oh, wow. We had 16 cabins. We had a grocery store. We had a trailer park, rec hall, snack bar, gas station, laundromat, public showers, boat rental, snow machine rental, and snow machine repair. We were living life at the jump of a buzzer. Our quarters were in behind the store, so whenever anybody came in the door, buzzer rang. And it was always a fight. Who's going to go get the door? You know, the only time we didn't have trouble with the boys answering the door is when a bevy of beauties showed up in a boat to get gas. And they were Johnny on the spot then. Never-ending chores. My gosh, those kids worked hard. You know, we raked 4 acres of pine needles. They had to collect garbage. They had to take linens. They learned the trades. You had 16 cabins. You add in the rec hall, and you add in the trailer park, and you add in the laundromat, and you know how many toilets there is that don't flush right. So they learned plumbing. How many light switches don't work? So they learned to be electricians. They learned the trade. They learned how to hammer nails. They learned how to pour concrete, the old farmer's way. But they learned all those trades. But most of all, in their waiting on the store, Scott learned to be a goodwill ambassador. Proof here. You know, the boys, and I have to say boys because they were pretty close, a lot of times oil and water, but they were boys. But their jobs to make extra money was to bag ice, and then they ended up doing the boat rental business. Well, most of the time they would bag ice because they got 50 cents a bag, so it depended on if they wanted to take their girl out or buy something special, why they'd remember to bag ice. So as an incentive, dear old Dad would come along and deduct 50 cents if I had to bag the ice. So when they found out they were going in the hole, they learned to bag ice. And then we let them start renting out the boats to start putting away a little money for future education. And that's when Scott started learning to drive the pickup, probably a little bit unbeknownst to his mother, a time or two. Probably not quite legal. But I was just down the road a little bit. It wasn't a public road. And they'd load the boat in the back of the pickup and take the motor and life jackets, oars, anchors, and all that. They'd go down, take care of the public. And again, if it was an old man going out fishing, why, they weren't too excited about it. But if it was a skimpy swimming suit, boy, they were ready. They were ready. And sometimes it took a little longer for them to come back than it really should have. So they learned to drive the pickup, shuttle the boats. And then we had an old beat up Datsun B210. And they learned to drive that. I think that's probably, after driving that, is when Scott had the need for speed. That's why he went to Seattle and played with the boats over there, the big boats, the ones that crazy people drive. And then he's here in Meridian and playing with the cars, and crazy people like Brian drive them. But he had that need for speed. His mother, and you see in the pictures up here, this tells a good story up here. If I could speak fast enough, I could narrate this for you, but I can't. But in it, you can see Scott water skiing. His mother taught him that barely after he could crawl. And then it wasn't much longer, she taught him how to drive the boat so that he could pull water skiers. So he was raised where chores were never done. There was always something to do: shovel snow, clean this up, clean up that. So he learned to work hard. But you know what? We taught him also to play hard. You know, they could swim, they could water ski, they could cross-country ski, never did downhill ski. Wouldn't let them go, afraid they'd break their leg, and then we'd lose our child labor force. But they loved to fish. Scott loved to go fishing with his grandma, Frasia, except when she came home, because a lot of times she wasn't satisfied with 1 5-gallon bucket of perch. She wanted 2, and Scott had to help fillet and clean those. And that's when he didn't like fishing with his grandma too much. Scott had a love for dogs. Well, he was raised around a dog or two early in life while we raised Yorkies, and then we started raising blue heelers, Queensland blue heelers. And the last batch had 7 pups. We were going to sell those. Scott's mother wouldn't allow us to sell them, so we had 9 dogs around the house. And they were indoor dogs, of course. And I tell you what, when she hollered, "Get out of the kitchen," it looked like an anthill you just poked. So Scott developed a love for dogs. And you see in these pictures here too of Christmas. Christmas was his mother's favorite time. And it was Scott's. You know, he just barely got Christmas taken down before his accident. He loved Christmas too. You know, he was generous and poured a pad out behind his garage that we parked our 5th wheel on. And every Christmas, he'd blow this ungodly horn to get Grandma and Grandpa up so they could have Christmas. But you know, it was paybacks because when they were little, we always had to wake them up. But Christmas was a fun time for him. When Scott was going through school, he had a pretty hard time with studies because he was dyslexic. But he studied hard. He did fair. I think the incentive there was so that he could play basketball. He loved that. He particularly loved it when Brad was on the court with him at the same time. But Scott, unfortunately, was growing so fast that occasionally his feet didn't know what his mind was saying. But he played his heart out. Had a great time. He loved snowmobiling. You know, we bought him a couple little 250s, each one of them. That didn't go fast enough. Whenever he could, he'd sneak over to my TXL 340 because it'd do about 90 out of the crate. And then, you know that Scott loved to do some wrenching on stuff. Well, we were wrenching on those snow machines so that if we could squeeze out an extra 5 miles or 10 miles an hour, we didn't care what the gas mileage was as long as that thing would shoot you down the lake. But when it come, we started snow racing up there, called it Snow Days for the chamber. And Scott would not race his mother in the drags because she'd whip his ass. And he could not tolerate that. So he learned quickly. You know, Scott did have, when he committed to something though, he did it. You know, after high school, we said, what are you gonna do? And he says, I wanna go to the Treasure Valley Community College. He did, he finished 2 years there and graduated. And then went on into other things. Some of them good, some of them not quite so good. Scotty sometimes had a little dark cloud over his head, and he got into some drugs and he got into some alcohol and made some bad choices. Ended up in prison, paid his debt, came out, got a full pardon, and then, by golly, he made something of himself. And a lot of people in this room were responsible for helping him make something of himself. You know, I'm so proud of him. Whoa. Breathe deep. 18, 19 years, I think, sober. What an accomplishment. He didn't mind. I'd have a cocktail pretty near every night when I was down there. I'd have one cocktail before supper. And he said, Dad, how do you have just one drink? He says, God, I'm allergic to alcohol. He says, every time I have a drink, my hands turn into handcuffs. But he knew that. And he kept away. And AA was so important to him. He looked forward to his meetings, but he really looked forward to the AA Christmas. He loved giving those kids much more than what he could afford and coordinating all that effort. And his eyes would just beam. He'd come home and, Dad, look at this. Look what I got to give. Oh, what a great thing. And then his summer campouts. I don't care what his mother and I were doing. We had to come babysit those dogs so he could go on that week campout. And he would prepare his biscuits and gravy and put them into Ziplocs and freeze him. And my God, when he went out of there, he had a cooler so full of that. I don't know how many people ate that, but he was thrilled to death to go on those. You know, Scott was bigger than life. If he walked into this room right now, you'd know he was there. If nothing else, his color. You saw the tie-dye stuff. He has shorts that my mother would cringe at. But he loved to show off. He was bigger than life, but he always had his hand out, helping the downtrodden and those that were a little less fortunate than him. He'd reach out and bring them back up and give them a chance. God bless him. He was a gentle giant, huge man. My God, when he hugged me, you better take 2 breaths before he did. But yet he could be so gentle. If any of you were ever in a room and a baby started to cry, that man could go over and pick that baby up, and he was like a baby whisperer. He could calm that baby, and it'd take a pretty big baby to feel his hand, too. And you know, Scott has continued. He continued to give after death. He was an organ donor. 9 lives he affected. Donation of organs after his death. 2 people in this world can see now because of what he donated. So he's continued. And that's why his mother and I set up a memorial at the Idaho Youth Ranch. And I'd invite you to donate, put money in the bucket or a check to Idaho Youth Ranch, and we'll see it gets there. So that he will continue in his honor and memory to help those that are less fortunate. You know, I'll miss the most about that young man is our morning talks, because when I was down here staying in the 5th wheel before he'd go to work, he was an early morning riser. I'd get up and we'd have coffee in the breezeway, and we'd pretty well solve all the issues in the world. May not have the resources to implement it, but we could pretty well solve all the issues. And I will miss those morning talks. And then pretty soon, why, his phone would either ring, and that thing rang all the time. I tell you what, I wouldn't put it there. The sun doesn't shine there. But he was busy, always on the phone. And finally, he'd say, "Oh, man, I've got to get out of here. I got to get to work." And he'd say, "Have a wonderful day, Dad. See you in a little bit." That was always what he said, "See you in a little bit." Now, to him, a little bit could be 2 minutes, 2 days, 2 weeks. It was kind of like his phone calls. You know, you'd be talking to him on, "Oh, excuse me, Dad, I got to answer this other line. I'll call you right back." Oh, you've been on the other end of that, haven't you? But you know, I'll see you in a little bit, Scott. Not only was he my son, he was my true friend. Thank you.
how y'all doing? Dad, that was fantastic. Wow. Hi. My goodness. Y'all knew Scott. Unbelievable. It's actually pretty powerful up here, you know, to see all the lives that he's touched. All right, so known my brother for 57 years. We'll start at year number 1. All right. I can't follow that one. No. You know, some of my early times with my brother when I was small, he was a protector for me. I always knew that. I don't really have a lot of memories of when I was small, but I knew that he was always there, and he made sure that I was taken care of, as well as my mom. And you know, really the memories really began when we did move to Cascade, and that was a true fact about, you know, acknowledging my dad into our life, and it was really fun. Scott was, you know, we had to learn how to live in the woods. We came from the city, and we ended up, you know, moving into the over there at the lodge, and it was different. I mean, we didn't have a place to really go. We had a lake. So we just really had to learn life in the mountains, and it was fantastic. He was my mushroom hunting buddy. We'd always go out and find morels, bring them home. We'd go fishing. We'd come home, hopefully. Now, the stories about Grandma was true, but when we'd go fishing, the fish would sit in the bucket for days, and they would not get cleaned. So there's always that smell somewhere around the house where we maybe chucked them off the side. So, you know, Scott was my only brother. I remember there's a couple of stories. I mean, since some of you are all the speed freaks, there was a couple of times, a story I want to tell you. Scott had just bought a Plymouth Arrow, a little pickup, and I think I might have been either a freshman and he was a sophomore in high school, or it could have been even a year up. I was a sophomore and he was a junior, and he's like, "Hey, let's go to Boise." And he goes, "I know that we can make it in under an hour." No doubt. We made it in probably 50 minutes is the number that I remember. And it was the scariest time of my life, yeah, for sure. But he was like, "We can't tell Mom and Dad." He's like, "We will definitely get in trouble." There's another story, too, of Scott and I, when the lake froze over so much, so thick, you know, we thought, let's chance it. And that Datsun B210 he was talking about, instead of going around the lake on the south end, we went straight across. And we made it. I mean, the car, just as long as we kept going, you know, it's like trying to dodge the soft spots, you know, in the lake. But we did make it in that car. And Scott was driving. And then, you know, before he did get his license and we were renting those boats, we had to run down some life jackets because we forgot to put them in the boat. So Scott's in the truck, I'm in the back, on the back of this Ford F-150, hanging onto the cab. And I'll tell you what, Scott went down that road so fast, and he was trying to pitch me out of that truck. Finally he did. He turned hard enough, hitting the brakes, and I fell out. And he just went ahead and went down and did his thing, came back, picked me up. So he was a good brother. He was a good brother. He really was. He was just, I love the story about the 9 lives because, he put himself at so much risk in everything that he did. And thank you for sharing that, because that was really powerful that he saved so many lives, being an organ donor. Scott was a wonderful uncle to my kids. He'd come over and he would just be larger than life, just happy, accepted them for who they were. He was just the greatest uncle. He really was. And I will miss that part. Seemed like every time I always drove by his house in the morning, I'd honk on my horn as I'd see him walk out the breezeway, and he just all the time, every time. But that's okay. He's my brother. I loved him. That was actually a love symbol from brother to brother, right? Yeah. He was really good, but what a blessing to see how many lives that my brothers touched, and really understanding his sobriety was really fun to come to know and learn and understand, because it meant the world to him. Now I see why. Yeah. Would you like to?
No.
Okay. Well, I will. There's just so much I didn't get to do with them. But one thing I do know is that he loved the Lord Jesus. It's all that matters. He's in the glory, and I'll get to see him one day. So thank you all so much for coming and sharing Scott's life. Great day. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
As we were preparing for the service, we were talking about an appropriate ending. I'm going to ask you all to do something that's kind of a little weird, I guess, in this setting, because there's so many of us. But I'm going to ask everybody to stand up and try to circle around. We're going to end reciting the Lord's Prayer. And yes, it is pretty cool. If you're unaware, this is how the AA meetings are ended. We thought this would be an appropriate way to remember the importance of those meetings to Scott and to recite this together. So, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. As we said before, please join us for food and memories and time in the back here.
Great job, thank you. I ignored you too early. I knew what was going on before. Yeah,